With the WINN FM News, I am Kevin Brown.
And I am Yulana Weeks.
Our top stories.
Police attribute repeated robberies at Chinese supermarkets to security failures. Education Ministry in Nevis updates hair policy for boys to allow hair braiding.
Sadler's mini supermarket robbery under investigation. Police charge Nguyen Kadim Daniel with 5 cannabis-related offenses. St. Kitts Nevis Prime Minister calls for deepened ties between Caribbean and Africa at Intra-African Trade Fair. Jagbio claims landslide victory for the PPP. Venezuelan embassy warns of unprecedented military threat in the Caribbean. Internationally, Israel strikes Gaza City high-rise apartment block in densely populated area leveled. Now, the details.
A wave of robberies has raised an alarm, with most police reports showing that a majority of the incidents have targeted small supermarkets, several of which are operated by members of the Chinese community. The robbers sometimes strike at closing time when cash registers are full and fewer customers are present, but the police have also recorded reports of broad daylight robberies, some located in busy areas, which have demonstrated a growing level of audacity. The robbers are typically dressed in dark clothing and masks and armed with guns, leaving workers and customers shaken. WINN FM has taken note of recent press releases by the Royal St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force, which gave a general idea of the boldness and regularity of the supermarket robberies. An armed robbery at the Sadler's mini supermarket St. Kitts was committed on September 1st, 2025, between the hours of 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. An armed robbery at Hong Yan Supermarket, located on Newtown Bay Road, St. Kitts, on August 31st, 2025, between 12 p.m. and 12:30 p.m. An armed robbery at a supermarket in Central Cayon on the evening of August 11, 2025, between 7:30 p.m. and 8 p.m. An armed robbery on July 20, 2025, between 11 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. at Hong Yang Supermarket on the Bay Road in Newtown, St. Kitts. An armed robbery on June 4, 2025, at Panda Chinese Supermarket on Upper Market Street around 2:30 p.m. and an armed robbery at approximately 7:15 p.m. on Wednesday, May 28, 2025, at the All-in-One Chinese Supermarket located in Diet Bay. In June 2025, the police engaged members of Chinese businesses to address rising security threats and provided a detailed presentation on personal and business security practices that owners can implement. Some Chinese supermarket owners have begun taking extra precautions by installing upgraded surveillance cameras and hiring private security to protect their establishments around the clock. However, Deputy Commissioner of Police Cromwell Henry told WINN FM that the supermarkets, particularly those recently targeted in a wave of robberies, have not implemented the security measures recommended by police. He said, quote, Chinese-owned businesses are frequently targeted because they are perceived by criminals as easy opportunities. The police have held multiple meetings with business owners, during which we provided guidance on improving their security, recommendations that were also shared with other local supermarkets. The local supermarkets acted promptly on these measures and as a result have not experienced any incidents. The Deputy Commissioner added, similarly, the Chinese supermarkets that fully adopted the recommendations have remained incident-free. However, those establishments that continue to suffer repeated robberies have not yet implemented the advised security measures, unquote. Meanwhile, the police have launched a full investigation into the robberies and are working tirelessly to identify and apprehend the individuals responsible. The police are urging anyone with information about the robberies to come forward and have also advised the supermarket owners to be vigilant, keep minimal cash on hand, and report any suspicious behavior. The Ministry of Education Nevis has officially updated its grooming policy for male students, now allowing boys to wear braided styles in schools. The decision comes more than 2 years after Sister Island St. Kitts updated its grooming policy. Though the girls on Nevis were allowed to adapt to the new grooming policy, which includes hair extensions, the boys were disallowed from braiding their hair. A fraction of the community raised concerns that the restrictions were outdated and unfair. Some people suggested that plaits are a traditional hairstyle deeply rooted rooted in cultural heritage, while others acknowledge that male students should not be penalized for wearing hairstyles that are clean, neat, and well maintained. For several years, though, the wearing of locks was approved, a demonstration of inclusivity and respect to the Rastafarian community. Under the new guidelines, boys are allowed to wear cornrows, single plaits, or twists if hair is longer than 2 inches in length. Short haircuts should not be longer than 2 inches in length and with no designs, and hair must be properly combed. Ponytails or buns with loose hair will not be permitted. Extensions or accessories should not be added. Male students are encouraged to keep their hair tidy and appropriate for the school environment. The policy change has been welcomed by many parents and members of society who long argued that previous rules were discriminatory.
The Royal St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force is investigating another robbery of a mini-mart on St. Kitts. The robbery occurred at the Sadler's Mini-Mart on September 1st, 2025, between the hours of 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. According to the police, preliminary inquiries indicate that a masked male assailant entered the establishment and demanded money at gunpoint. The assailant proceeded to steal a sum of money from the register, after which he fled the scene on foot. Anyone with information regarding this incident is urged to contact the nearest police station or the Crime Stoppers hotline at 707. Kadim Daniel of Anguilla slapped with 5 charges in connection with cannabis-related offenses following the discovery of suspected contraband during a routine vessel search. On September 2, 2025, officers of the St. Kitts and Nevis Customs and Excise Department conducted a routine inspection of a motor vessel that had docked at the Charlestown Pier, Nevis. During the search of Daniel's luggage, officers uncovered 3 plastic bags containing cannabis. Daniel was subsequently taken into custody by the police and the contraband was seized. On September 3, 2025, Daniel was formally charged by both the police force and the Customs and Excise Department with possession of cannabis with intent to supply by the police, importation of cannabis by the police, and by the Customs Department, importation of restricted goods, importation of goods packaged in a manner to deceive a customs officer, and counterfeiting documents. Prime Minister the Honourable Dr. Terence Drew on a presidential panel at the Intra-African Trade Fair in Algeria on September 4, 2025, called for transforming the history of the transatlantic slave trade into a transatlantic bridge of hope linking Africa and the Caribbean. The Prime Minister reminded the gathering that the Caribbean, as the 6th region of the African Union, shares deep historical ties with Africa and should now turn that history into a future of shared prosperity.
The Caribbean has always been a fundamental part of Pan-Africanism. Who here does not know about Bob Marley and reggae music? He was a Pan-Africanist. Who here does not know about Marcus Garvey, who was also a Pan-Africanist? And just to give you a backdrop, in 1945, a Pan-Africanist conference was held in London. And the leaders of that were both Africans and Caribbean people. George Padmore, and from Africa I will just name one, Kwame Nkrumah. That was after the Second World War. And they declared at that meeting in England that Africa must be free. Everybody knows that Nkrumah went back to Ghana and fought for the independence of that great country. And embedded in his cabinet was George Padmore, who was a Caribbean man, an intellectual, who was tasked with helping to set up the Pan-African movement within Nkrumah's government. Again, highlighting the close history between the Caribbean movement for liberation and the African movement for liberation. Hence, my presence here is well bona fide.
During his presentation, Prime Minister Drew emphasized opportunities for partnership.
As a backdrop, I would like to say that recently we have started to establish deeper ties with Africa, as we are the 6th region. Just in a few days, I will be in Addis Ababa, where the African Union and CARICOM will have its first face-to-face summit in its history. There was one in about 2021, which was virtual due to COVID. This is significant. But beyond the historical ties, which are critically important, there are beneficial things to be had between, as a result of the communication and re-establishment of ties between the African continent and its sixth region. And I want to thank the African Bank for really helping to promote this relationship. As a result of that, we have had at least 2 Caribbean-African summits held in the Caribbean, the latest edition being held in Grenada. And at that edition, we saw entrepreneurs, business people, investors from the African continent in the Caribbean seeking for opportunities to increase trade and the relationship. I can say that for my own country, St. Kitts and Nevis, we have had the opportunity to interact with companies from here on the African continent, where we are now pursuing investments from Africa in the Caribbean, because the Caribbean, I would say, has tremendous opportunities, and establishing this relationship of trade would create opportunities for all of us.
The Prime Minister elaborated on the various ways in which the Federation is benefiting from deepening ties with the African continent and says this is just the beginning.
Since establishing this new relationship with Africa, we are now benefiting from the Open University of Tanzania. We are establishing deeper relationship with vocational studies in Kenya. We are now seeking to establish greater relationships, I would say, in Ghana. And this, of course, I would say is the beginning and not the end. For example, the trade between the Caribbean and Africa is roughly 1% or less. That is a very, very small percentage. You might look at that and say, why is it important? When I look at a small number like that, I see hope. There is a silver lining. There's only one place that trade can go. It cannot go down anymore. It is an opportunity to go up. Hence, we should establish this deeper relationship. And so let me point out a few areas where there are opportunities to invest in the Caribbean. In technology, emerging technology, in agricultural products, in renewable energy. The Caribbean has geothermal energy. Kenya is very good at geothermal energy. We have sun, we have wind. Our potential is vast when it comes to the energy space. Tourism is a critical part of the Caribbean financial architecture. But there are no flights that go from Africa directly to the Caribbean. To go from the Caribbean to Africa, you have to go north to come back south. And it takes sometimes 2 to 3 days. However, in the Caribbean, we have direct flights from Europe and various cities within North America. And believe it or not, it is a shorter trip for me to travel from St. Kitts and Nevis to this great country than it is for me to travel from my country to London. Yet, I have direct flights from my country to London and no direct flights from my country to the African continent. Therefore, there is great opportunity for growth in the tourism sector, with Africa having over 1 billion people and the Caribbean being a premier area for tourism. Therefore, there are opportunities for this to grow.
The potential for growth is limitless, according to Prime Minister Drew, in trade, investment, education, renewable energy, tourism, health, sports, and the creative industries, given that Africa-Caribbean trade currently stands at less than 1%.
There is so much room for growth even when it comes to the creatives. In healthcare, in sports, what I'm basically saying is that there are opportunities in every sphere of our development because our trade today only represents 1% with Africa, and with global Africa, that will only go up.
On behalf of the Caribbean, Prime Minister Drew said the region is deeply invested in the relationship with the African continent.
We are much integrated and we are much interested in bringing a greater relationship with Africa as the continent and its sixth region. This will help us to create opportunities for our people and to rewrite a history, but a history not written by them, but a history written by us, for us, by us, for our own interests.
The call to action was clear from Dr. Drew to get on board the train of African upliftment and movement. In regional news, Jagdeo claims landslide victory for the PPP. News Source Guyana reports.
General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party, Vice President Barra Jagdeo, is extremely happy with the results of the 2025 elections that have so far been declared by the 10 electoral districts, and has brushed aside the concerns from the other political parties about the vote. The declared results by districts show the PPP remaining in office, but with a bigger majority in the parliament.
The tabulation of those results shows that the PPP Civic won a landslide in the 2025 elections. In 2020, the People's Progressive Party got 50.7% of the votes. The combined opposition got 49.3% of the votes. The difference was less than 1 percentage point. It was 0.3 of a percentage of a percent difference. Just 0.3. In these elections, the PPP, based on the results on the GCOMS page, got 55.32% of the votes. The combined opposition, 44.68% of the votes, a difference of 10.6% from considering in 2020 0.3 of 1%. And now in these elections, a difference between the PPP and the combined opposition of 10.6%. This is a landslide by any standard.
Mr. Jagdeo said although there was a considerably low voter turnout, the PPP still managed to hold its base and increase its votes in many areas, and even in regions that did not support the PPP in the past. He said from the results declared so far, his party's support remains rock solid among PPP and Amerindian voters, while there was an increase in support from the Afro-Guyanese communities.
As I said before, thank you to everyone who supported the PPP. We'll continue to work for all of Ghana. The PPP won these elections with a landslide. Don't listen to these naysayers. All of them are trying to diminish the PPP's victory. Oh, we want a recount here. No, somebody didn't smile at me nicely in the polling place. Somebody took away my crown from my suit or something like that I was wearing there. You're going to hear all sorts of stupid things like we heard before. But the results are clear. And this time, the SOPs are in the hands of every Guyanese.
Mr. Jagdeo also hailed the Ghana Elections Commission for conducting the elections in a smooth and transparent manner.
There were lots of rumors before the elections about GCOM's capability. Every international observer group spoke of the manner in which the elections were conducted. The quality of the staff, the helpfulness of the staff, the professionalism of the GCOM staff, their adherence to procedures to ensure the transparency of the vote. And we saw it, we witnessed it, and we should give appreciation to the leadership of GCOM.
The General Secretary of the PPP said he believes that his party was able to outshine the other parties because the party campaigned on a positive message and got the buy-in of the majority of voters.
Venezuelan embassy warns of unprecedented military threat in the Caribbean. DBS St. Lucia has that story.
On September 1st, President Maduro alerted the international community to the arrival of 8 U.S. warships carrying more than 1,000 missiles along with nuclear-capable submarines, described as the largest U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean in a century. For the Venezuelan government, This marks the first time such weaponry has been introduced into the region in what it calls a violation of international treaties, including the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which prohibits nuclear weapons in Latin America, and the CELAC Declaration that established the Caribbean and Latin America as a zone of peace in 2014. Officials say the show of force threatens not only Venezuela's sovereignty, but also the safety and the security of all nations in the region. In response, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, held an emergency meeting the same day. Foreign ministers reaffirmed their rejection of foreign military intervention and backed Venezuela's call to take the issue before the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Ivan Gil accused Washington of using false narratives to justify an intervention and urged regional unity. Venezuela also pointed to its resilience in the face of past destabilization efforts, including armed incursions and political sabotage in 2019 and 2020. This time, Caracas insists the country is stronger, more united, and ready to defend its sovereignty through what it calls the Civic Military Police Union. The embassy in Castries emphasized Venezuela's deep historical bonds with the Caribbean, recalling freedom fighters like St. Lucia's Jean-Baptiste Bidot, who fought alongside Simon Bolivar. Those ties, the statement said, show a brotherhood that goes beyond diplomacy. The communiqué closes with an urgent appeal to Caribbean governments, regional organizations, and the international community to denounce the militarization of the Caribbean and defend the region's future as a true zone of peace. For the DBS News World, Manasseh Stanislas reporting.
We now bring you these international reports.
2 Israeli missiles slam into a high-rise building in Gaza City. The military issued evacuation orders warning the tower would be hit just 15 minutes before the strike. The force of the shock wave shakes the hundreds of tents surrounding the tower, and people flee in panic. Many families had been sheltering in the building. It's not known if all of them managed to escape in time. 15 minutes later, a second attack, and the building collapses, destroying dozens of tents and makeshift shelters and terrifying children.
This is the reality in Gaza City. The Mushtahat Tower, which is located in Gaza City and shelters a large number of displaced civilians. It was reduced to ashes. This is the policy of the Israeli occupation, to level all buildings in preparation for a ground invasion. Only God is our shield.
Doctors at the Shifa hospital say they were overwhelmed by the number of dead and injured. Israel says the tower was being used by Hamas fighters. The building's management told Al Jazeera that is a lie.
It's impossible in 15 minutes to evacuate hundreds of tents and all the people, refugee living in one building, and then to go where? It is not giving them enough time to evacuate and should not bomb in the vicinity of another refugee camp of people who evacuated more than 8 to 10 times.
Israel's defense minister says the gates of hell are opening in Gaza. It is believed a new phase of airstrikes is beginning, targeting high-rise buildings. For people here in Gaza City, the destruction is the systematic erasure of homes, memories, and their community. The city is being leveled, and with it, their future is torn down, one tower at a time. Hani Mahmoud, Al Jazeera, from Gaza City, Palestine.
Arriving for his big day, Anutin Chanbirakun enters Parliament on Friday morning. Top of the agenda, the vote for a new Prime Minister, and Anutin, in the glare of the media spotlight, is the favourite. The 58-year-old construction billionaire has made little secret of his ambition for Thailand's top job. His career in politics began 20 years ago, but he got his big break as health minister during the COVID-19 crisis. His other claim to fame is as the man who pushed for cannabis liberalization, a position backed by his party, Bumjai Thai. As the votes came in, it was soon clear he had an unassailable lead. A deal with the Progressive People's Party to dissolve Parliament early next year gave him the support he needed, but it also means his time in power could be brief.
The media is now waiting for Mr. Anutin to come down from the debating chamber. But if he keeps to his word, he'll only be in power for 4 months. He's promised to call a general election and push for constitutional reform. But he's also known to be an ambitious man. And once he's had a taste of power, will he want to hang on?
And for many in Thailand, the appointment of a third prime minister in just 2 years is not good news.
We are waiting to see the real democracy in Thailand. We want to see how people express their idea, their opinion. We want to see the clean politics, transparency politics. But with this kind of involvement from the elites, so it's really difficult for Thailand.
The new prime minister wasn't being drawn on future plans, however. Uncharacteristically quiet as he left the building, despite the media attention. But Anutin Chanvirakul is not a shy man, and he won't be quiet for long. Tony Cheng, Al Jazeera, Bangkok.
Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, has been telling his party's annual conference in Birmingham that Reform is the party on the rise and that the next general election could be as early as 2027. From Birmingham, here's Joe Pike.
Victory at the local elections gave Reform a peek at power. This growing fan base hopes much more is possible. And the boss believes he's assembling an enviable team.
Is your party more than a one-man band, Mr Farage?
His latest teammate, former Tory Cabinet Minister Nadine Dorries, who Mr Farage has been rather rude about in the past.
What changed your mind on Nadine Dorries, Mr Farage?
No, I think Nadine Dorries has changed her mind and she's realised that the Conservative Party is dead. As she said, it's dead. It's had it.
He's also attempting to capitalise on Labour's problems. Angela Rayner's resignation meant Farage's fireworks were detonated 3 hours earlier than planned.
The reason that I've moved this speaking time forward is because this government is deep in crisis. We are the patriotic party. We are the party that stands up for decent working people, and we are the party on the rise.
Today he announced a new department to help Reform get ready for the possibility of government. And he argued that splits on the left mean that could come far sooner than expected.
I think there is every chance now of a general election happening in 2027, and we must be ready.
Nigel Farage pledged serious cuts to the benefits bill, and he made this promise.
We will stop the boats within 2 weeks of winning government.
He didn't say how that'll be achieved, but his party's immigration policies seem popular amongst members and a lot of voters too.
Reform's sustained lead in the opinion polls is remarkable, but maintaining it for years could be difficult. It's perhaps why today Nigel Farage spoke so much about preparedness and unity.
I'm blown away by Nigel's speech. I think it's what Britain's crying out for.
Your critics argue the numbers don't add up.
That's absolutely nonsense. Look at this current government. They don't know whether they're talking about a 20 billion black hole or a 30 billion black hole.
And what do you want to cut?
We've got to cut, for example, all the waste, the unnecessary waste. We've got to get people back to work. Well, for example, the welfare budget.
This conference may have been overshadowed by events at Westminster, but Reform remain bullish about their chances in the years ahead.
Nigel Farage specifically highlighted the opportunity, as he sees it, of next May's elections to both the Welsh Senedd and Scottish Parliament. There seems to be a hope here in Birmingham the Reform have time on their side, both to set out more policy and to build up their campaigning operation. There, though, can be a bit of a danger in time in politics if the next general election is in 2 years' time, as Nigel Farage predicted today, or 4 years, as is more likely. Well, a lot could happen between now and then, including changes in the opinion polls. And, of course, Sophie, as the events of Westminster today, I think, can prove 24 hours is a pretty long time in politics, let alone 2 or 4 years.
This is Macro Matters, and we're talking US jobs. August jobs number was expected to be a modest 75,000, but it came in far lower than that. Stock markets are happy because that means a rate cut from the Fed this month is now seen as locked in. But after the news earlier this week that the US has more unemployed people than vacancies for the first time since the pandemic, does this mean the wider economy is slowing? Gregory Dacre is chief economist at EY Parthenon. Gregory, what's behind this unexpectedly low number?
Well, I think what we are seeing is a visible
visible cool down in the labor market. There is broad-based evidence that economic activity is slowing under the pressure of trade policy and immigration policy. And I think this is reflected now in the non-farm payrolls data, which indicate that over the last 3 months, we've only added about 30,000 jobs on a monthly basis. So there is softness in the labor market. It's both a labor demand issue and a labor supply issue. Both are influencing job growth to the downside. And I would also stress that we're also seeing greater job growth concentration in a few sectors, so that most of the sectors are actually seeing job cuts across the board.
How much of this is about the uncertainty around tariffs, do you think?
I think that's very much part of the picture. We are in an environment where businesses are hesitant to invest into the future. They're essentially also facing higher input costs, and the cost of goods and services are rising. And so businesses are having to do that difficult trade-off of how do you manage to protect your margins in an environment where cost pressures are ever rising? And one avenue to do that is essentially to manage talent. So we had seen strategic talent management. Now we're seeing more of a push towards strategic layoffs, less hiring, and that is putting downward pressure on the labor market overall.
You said that labour supply is also slowing. Do you mean that immigration policy is reducing the pool of available workers?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in terms of the economic data is that the labor force participation rate has been pressured down. That indicates that there are fewer people looking for employment. And that's been one of the factors that's prevented the unemployment rate from rising. If the participation rate had not moved since May, we would have actually seen an unemployment rate closer to 5% instead of the 4.3% that we saw in August. So there is definitely a shock that we're observing from the supply side of the labor market, which is due in part to some of the immigration restrictions that are curtailing labor supply.
Last month's data, of course, was called into question by President Trump, who fired the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and is seeking to replace her with a Trump loyalist who hasn't yet been confirmed. Are there any reasons to doubt this data?
Well, I think generally speaking, all statistical agencies have very strong institutional guardrails, and that prevents any type of immediate pressure on the data to go one way or the other. So I continue to very much trust the institution in being able to do the best job possible to deliver the best quality data. And that's why there are subsequent revisions to each report. Once the statistical agencies gather more data, then they essentially fine-tune their first estimates. And that is hopefully going to continue to be the case going forward.
Financial markets now clearly see a certain rate cut this month, since this number makes the case that the US economy needs that help. But is the Fed behind the curve now?
I think the Fed is somewhat behind the curve, yes. I've been arguing for a while now that there was room for the Fed to essentially neutralize monetary policy. Currently, monetary policy is slightly restrictive. And we've been arguing that essentially there are ongoing signs that disinflation is underway on the services side, and that despite the renewed cost pressures from tariffs, these are likely to be a one-time effect on prices and inflation, not a long-lasting shock. I think this morning's data in terms of the labor market indicates that second-round effects are less likely in an environment where labor market conditions are weaker and wage growth is actually easy.
Where can the Fed go from here then? Do you see several cuts this year?
I think we could anticipate a couple of rate cuts from the Fed over the course of 2025. That is one rate cut in September and one rate cut in December. Markets seem to price another rate cut in October, but I would remind everyone that we are still in an environment where Fed policymakers are extremely data dependent. So any type of upward pressure on the inflation front will keep hawkish Fed members on the fence about excessively easing monetary policy. And so you're likely to see split votes over the coming months into 2026 as to the trajectory of Fed policy.
You were listening to the WINN FM 98.9 newscast. Our top stories were:
police attribute repeated robberies at Chinese supermarkets to security failures. Education Ministry in Nevis updates hair policy for boys to allow hair braiding.
Sadler's mini supermarket robbery under investigation. Police charge Nguyen Kadim Daniel with 5 cannabis-related offenses. St. Kitts Nevis Prime Minister calls for deepened ties between Caribbean and Africa at Intra-African Trade Fair. Jack Dio claims landslide victory for the PPP. Venezuelan embassy warns of unprecedented military threat in the Caribbean. Internationally, Israel strikes Gaza City high-rise apartment block in densely populated area leveled.
Thank you for listening.